Iain Reid's I'm Thinking of Ending Things is one of the greatest books that I have ever read. I stumbled onto it when I saw that Netflix had made a film adaptation. I was interested in watching the movie, but I saw that it was based on a book, and so I decided to go to Barnes& Noble and pick up the book first. What followed was one of the most unsettling, mind-bending books that I have ever read. So today, we are going to go through the novel, breaking down the plot, explaining the ending and the twists, and then re-examining the events of the novel through our newfound clarity. I should say that I recommend you read the novel first since it's incredible, but if you're like me and sometimes you just want to have something explained to you, then I'm happy to take you on this journey. This video will contain full spoilers for I'm Thinking of Ending Things, the novel. The movie is actually quite different from the book, and while I love Charlie Kaufman, I felt that it didn't quite capture what makes the book so eerie. All that to say, if you have already seen the film, you can still get some value out of this video, so let's get into it. The book starts like this. I'm thinking of ending things. Once this thought arrives, it stays, it sticks, it lingers, it dominates. There's not much I can do about it, trust me. It doesn't go away. It's there whether I like it or not. It's there when I eat, when I go to bed. It's there when I sleep. It's there when I wake up. It's always there. Always. Now, if you're like most people, then you will assume that the title is referring to someone who plans to end their own life. This isn't the case. The title actually refers to a woman who wants to end her relationship with her boyfriend, Jake. Our unnamed female protagonist is the narrator of this story, and we get to experience it all through her point of view. For the ease of narration, we're going to just call her Jessica. Jessica and Jake are taking a trip out to the country to visit Jake's parents. Jessica has never met them before and is nervous for the whole encounter, especially since she is thinking about breaking up with Jake. Jake doesn't seem to pick up on her concerns and is mostly excited for the trip, although he seems to feel the need to warn Jessica that his parents are a little strange. Jessica is scattered throughout the novel. She doesn't seem to have the best memory and has a hard time pinning down the exact timeline of events in her and Jake's relationship. We learn that they have been dating for about 7 weeks, but that she feels like she's known him a lot longer than she has. She also says that they share an intense connection. We learn that the two of them met at a college bar during trivia night. Jessica was dragged there by her friend, and she ended up striking up a conversation with Jake. She can't remember the beginning of it, but she tried asking him about the name of his trivia team, which was named Brezhnev's Eyebrows. Jake tells her that Brezhnev was a Soviet engineer with 2 monster caterpillars. I swear that's what it says. 2 monster caterpillars for eyebrows. And this really gets Jessica going. She loves the way his mind works. She loves the way that he thinks and the way he kind of has these fancy explanations for seemingly mundane things. The two talk for a while, and eventually Jake slips a note into Jessica's bag that says, "If I had your number, we could talk, and I'd tell you something funny." That's kind of a weird thing to write on a note. I mean, I certainly didn't have like the best game back when I was single in college, but even I would think that's like a little bit of an odd thing to write on a note. But it worked for Jake, and as usual, Jessica is really into it, and that is kind of what starts off their whole relationship. After this, we get an insert of 2 unknown people talking about an event that has taken place. These little sections show up periodically, and I wasn't sure what to do with them at first, but I think I'm just going to read them straight through in their entirety, because they end up being very important at the end of the novel, and the way they're written is just interesting. So this is our first one. I still don't understand. How could something like this happen? We're all in shock. Nothing so horrible has ever happened around here. No, not like this. In all the years I've worked here, I would think not. I didn't sleep last night, not a wink. Me neither. Couldn't get comfortable. I can barely eat. You should have seen my wife when I told her. I thought she was going to be sick. How could he actually do it? Go through with it? You don't do that on a whim. You couldn't. It's scary is what it is. Scary and disturbing. So, did you know him? Were you close or... No, not close. I don't think anyone was close with him. He was a loner. That was his nature. Kept to himself. Standoffish. Some knew him better, but... it's crazy. It doesn't seem real. It is one of those terrible things, but unfortunately, it's very real. So we have 2 people discussing a tragic event that has recently occurred. It was caused by a man that they were aware of, but that mostly kept to himself. We also learn that this is the kind of event that is not common around this area. We're going to learn more about what happened exactly later, but for now, we're going to continue with Jake and Jessica. As they continue their drive to Jake's parents' house, Jessica reflects a little bit more on their relationship. We learn that things moved pretty quickly after their first date and that they've already been intimate with each other. Jessica describes both of them as attractive in a sort of unremarkable way, like neither of them would stand out in a crowd, but they do share a mutual attraction to each other. After this, Jessica tells us about an experience that she had when she was younger. She was up late at night in bed when she looked out of her window and she saw a tall, pale man. The man's face was higher than the window, so she couldn't see like what he actually looked like. She could just see like his neck down. And then he waved at her and then just left. And she says she feels like she can still see this man around. She felt very threatened by the situation, and it feels like this man is potentially stalking her. Pretty creepy. We then learn that she is consistently getting calls from her own phone number, which shouldn't be possible. The caller is a man who leaves the same message over and over and over again, and this is what it says. He says, "There is only one question to resolve. I'm scared. I feel a little crazy. I'm not lucid. The assumptions are right. I can feel my fear growing. Now is the time for the answer. Just one question to answer." The caller leaves these messages on her phone over and over again, and she doesn't seem nearly as bothered by it as she should be. But one night, after the initial message that he always leaves, the caller says, "Now I'm going to say something that will upset you. I know what you look like. I know your feet and hands and your skin. I know your head and your hair and your heart. You shouldn't bite your nails." Jessica then remarks that she has been biting her nails since 5th grade. We then get another insert that reads as follows. "The night you called, we were having a dinner party. I'd made a pecan galette with salted caramel sauce for dessert. That call. The whole night was ruined for everyone after we heard. I can still remember every word of your call. The kids were out when I heard. I called you right away. Was he depressed or sick? Do we know if he was depressed? Apparently he wasn't on any antidepressants. He was keeping secrets though. I'm sure there were more. Yeah. If only we'd known how serious it was. If only there'd been some signs. There are always signs. People don't just do that. This wasn't a rational person." That's true. That's a good point. He's not like us. No, not like us at all. If you have nothing, there's nothing to lose. Yeah, nothing to lose. It was at this point that I was starting to fear for Jessica's safety, and I don't want to influence your thoughts one way or another, but the idea of somebody having nothing to lose and then performing an act that has traumatized a community is just really chilling to me. But let's continue on with the story. We get another 2 chapters of Jake and Jessica making small talk as they drive to his parents' house. We learn that Jessica is intimately familiar with pretty much everything about Jake. That is a constant throughout the entire story. At the beginning of the story, she says that she feels like she's known him for longer than she has. We're going to come back to that later as well. The entire drive up to this point has been very snowy, like they're driving during the winter on a snowy road. Jake insists that it'll clear up, and Jessica seems slightly nervous, but not really nervous enough to bring it up. One of the striking aspects of the book to me is just how casually Jessica talks about thinking of ending the relationship. She isn't like in some consistent inner battle about it. It almost seems like she treats it like as an inevitability, like something that's going to happen for sure. We get another couple pages of them talking, and then after that we get another insert, so I'll read that now. "Some of the rooms were vandalized, I heard. Yup, paint on the floor, red paint, some water damage. Did you know he put a chain on the door? Why did he do it in here? To make some selfish, twisted point maybe, I don't know. He wasn't a vandal type, was he? No, but the strange thing is he'd started writing graffiti on some of the walls. We all knew it was him. People saw him doing it. He denied it, but volunteered to clean it off every time. That's weird. That's not even the weird part. What? The strange part was that he wrote the same thing every time. The graffiti, just one sentence. What was it? There's only one question we need to resolve. There's only one question we need to resolve? Yep, that's what he wrote. What's the question? I have no idea. There's only one question we need to resolve. Could the caller have caused this incident? That certainly seems likely to me. But anyway, I'm not going to influence your thinking anymore. We get our next insert after a chapter where Jake discusses with Jessica the reality of memories. Jessica points out that memories aren't really real since they can be manipulated, and Jake notes that reality only happens once. This phrase kind of comes up throughout the novel, just reality only happens once. Even though Jessica seems to have not understood more of Jake's metaphysical rants before, she seems to be able to keep up a good conversation with him now, almost like she now understands what he's talking about. But I'm just going to go ahead and read our next insert now that we get. He had keys. He wasn't scheduled to be here, but he had keys. He could do whatever he wanted. Wasn't there supposed to be some revarnishing done during the break? Yes, but that happened right at the start of the holidays, so the varnish would have time to dry. The varnish scent can be pretty strong. Toxic? Again, I'm not sure. Maybe if that's all you were breathing. Are we going to see any autopsy results? I can look into that. Was it messy? You can imagine. I can. We shouldn't get into the details right now. I hear they found a breathing apparatus, a gas mask, near the body? Yes, but it was an old one. It's unclear if it still worked. There's so much we don't know about what really happened in there, and the only one who can tell us is gone. So our mystery person was potentially influenced by some varnish fumes and was at this location during a break. That sounds like a school to me. Let's continue. We learn that Jake is some sort of scientist and that he works in a lab. He seems to be a pretty smart guy and is very proud of his work and just his general knowledge about everything, about how the world works. He seems to be the kind of guy that just knows a lot of stuff, hence why he was at trivia night that night. He then gives Jessica like a verbal tour of his lab, and then Jessica seems to kind of back off of her plan of ending things with him. At this moment, she seems like she's just really into Jake. Jessica then brings up depression. She asks Jake if he knows what it feels like to be depressed, and he says that he doesn't. She thinks to herself that she is currently struggling with depression as she feels like her life has been stagnant for a while. She says she's worked the same job for years and is jealous of Jake's fancy job in a lab. She remarks that if she is depressed, she doesn't know when it started, and then we get another insert. The body was found in the closet. Really? Yeah, a small closet. Big enough to hang shirts and jackets, some boots, not much else. The body was all scrunched up in there. The door was closed. It makes me sad and angry. Why not reach out to someone, right? Talk to someone. He had coworkers. It wasn't like he was working in a place without other people. There were people all around him all the time. I know, it didn't have to happen this way. Of course not. Do we know much about his background? Not a lot. He was smart, well-read. He knew things. He'd had an earlier career. Some sort of academic work. PhD level, I think. That didn't last and he ended up here. He wasn't married? No, he wasn't married. No wife, no kids, no one. It's rare these days to see someone living that life. Entirely alone. So a body found in a locker and a man who said it was very smart and he used to do some PhD level work but then fell off and went away from all that. It's pretty interesting to me. Jake and Jessica then arrive at the house, but Jake doesn't want to go inside right away. He talks to Jessica and takes her through the barn, and it's all just kind of really depressing. We see some like frozen dead lambs in the back, and Jake recounts a story about finding 2 of the family pigs being eaten alive by maggots. It's super disgusting and gross, and I dislike it. Jessica then thinks that she sees Jake's mom watching them from inside the house, just kind of staring at them from like the front porch. And so the two decide to go and enter the house now. The house is your pretty standard old people house. It's nice and tidy with some like little ornamental figures all over the place. The strangest aspect of the house is this scratched up door that leads to the basement. Jessica asks about the door and Jake seems to get really annoyed about this, and he tells her that it was from an old dog that they used to have. But Jessica kind of makes note of this weird scratch door and just can't stop thinking about it. Jessica then takes a look at a wall of old photos and remarks that all the people in the pictures look very sad. All of them except for one. It's a little kid with blonde hair smiling on a dirt road next to a tricycle. Jessica asks Jake who it is, and Jake says, like, really kind of coyly, he's like, oh, you don't recognize it? That's me as a kid. And this immediately confuses Jessica because she is certain that the person in the picture is her. After that, we get another insert. They say he'd pretty much stopped talking. Stopped talking? Became nonverbal. Would work but wouldn't talk. It was awkward for everyone. I would pass him in the hall, would say hi, and he'd have a hard time looking at me square in the eye. He'd blush, become distant. Really? Yeah, I remember regretting hiring him. And not because he was incompetent. Everything was always clean and tidy. He did his job. But it got to the point where I had this feeling, I sensed something, like he wasn't quite normal. This sort of justifies your feeling. It does. I should have acted, done something, I guess, based on my gut. You can't start second guessing after the fact. We can't let the actions of one man make us feel guilty. This isn't about us. We're the normal ones. It's only about him. You're right. It's good to be reminded of that. So what now? We try to forget this, all of it. We find a replacement. We move on. So it seems our mystery man was some sort of janitor, someone in charge of cleaning something, and that they were hired by one of the two people in the insert. That certainly explains the varnish scent they mentioned earlier. Okay, moving on with Jake and Jessica now. Jake's parents are a little odd, but seem well-meaning. His mom mentions that she has tinnitus and hears little voices in her ears constantly, which is a little bit alarming, but again, she seems like a nice person. She also suffers from sleep paralysis, which, as somebody who suffers from sleep paralysis like every month or so, it's a really terrifying feeling. Like you literally just sit there and you cannot move. Like you're awake, but you can't move your body or say anything. The whole experience is really terrifying, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the overall narrative of the story, but just that feeling of being trapped, unable to move, but still conscious is kind of an important theme that comes up throughout the novel. Now that they're all eating dinner, Jake's parents insist on playing a game where they all mimic each other. Jessica finds this a little odd, but she just plays along nonetheless. Her impression of Jake is like passable, it's fine, but then his impression of her that he does is like exact. Like he says it feels like he is just mimicking her exactly, like all of her mannerisms and the way she moves and the way she speaks, he's getting it exactly right, and this starts to make her pretty uncomfortable. After dinner, Jessica goes to the bathroom and she remarks that she starts to feel tired and like there are bags under her eyes. Her nose then starts to bleed, which she says hasn't happened to her for years. She then decides to visit the basement now that Jake is busy with his parents. Again, the basement is that scratched door that she saw that Jake seemed really upset about her even mentioning it. Inside the basement, she just finds a really small room that she can barely stand up in, and the only thing that is inside the basement is a fan that is blowing on a drying painting that has been freshly painted on an easel. The painting is of a tall woman with long hair and long nails. She's kind of hunched over and menacing looking. This creeps Jessica out, but what creeps her out even more is that all around the room in the basement, there are just like dozens of these paintings. It's the same woman, the same like long fingernails and hair, but they're all slight different variations of this woman. So like sometimes she's got like different colored hair, or her fingers are longer, or they're shorter, or she has different body parts on here. The whole vibe is really creepy, and this entire like section of the book got me really tense, thinking like, did Jake paint these? Did his mom paint these? It was probably one of his parents since it was freshly drying. The whole thing is really eerie, but a great section of the book. Jessica is understandably creeped out by this and decides to leave the basement, but while she's going up the stairs, she hears Jake's parents discussing someone. They say that this is a person who quit their job at the lab, but needs something with stability. They say he can't keep going around his life being completely alone. We know that Jake works at a lab, but he is in a committed relationship with Jessica, so it's probably not him that they're talking about. It's still kind of weird, and then after that we get our next insert. Do we know the official cause of death? Bled out from the puncture wounds. Awful. Bled for hours, we think. Quite a bit of blood. It must have been terrible to stumble across. Yes, I imagine it was. Horrible. Something you'd never forget. When Jessica returns from the basement, she is unable to find Jake, and so she decides to go up and take a look at his room. They talked about visiting his room earlier. Inside, she finds a bunch of old photos. One of them is of a short blonde girl. At first, she thinks that this is probably just Jake's high school girlfriend, but earlier in the story, he mentioned his girlfriend, and he mentioned that she was tall and brunette, and that's not what the girl in the picture looks like. She mentions that the girl looks kind of like her, but not quite exactly a match, and then behind the girl is a man who is watching her. Jessica remarks that the man watching her is definitely not Jake, but he looks kind of like a loner, an outsider, and slightly menacing. Jake's dad then goes up to the room and finds Jessica, and he starts to apologize for how weird and odd he thinks his wife is. He says that she isn't crazy, but that she just gets a little scattered at times. He also tells her that he thinks she and Jake are a perfect match for each other, and she starts smiling uncontrollably and can't stop. She seems really pleased with the fact that Jake's dad approves of their relationship, so it's a little bit weird. Jessica and Jake then get ready to leave the house, and Jake's mom brings them a whole bunch of food for them to take with them. She also takes a piece of paper and puts it in Jessica's hand and tells her that it's something that she made for her, but not to open it. She says that Jessica is not ready to see it, and that it is a portrait of Jake that his mom had drawn years ago. So make of that what you will. We'll explore what that is later. On the drive home, Jessica brings up the picture of the girl in Jake's room. He remarks that it was just a childhood friend of his. And then when Jessica asks about the man that's in the background of the picture, Jake says that it was probably his brother, which kind of weirds Jessica out because she did not know that he had a brother up to this point. Jake says that he has an older brother who started developing problems a couple years back and that they don't really talk anymore. His brother was on track to become a full professor at a university after finishing his PhD, but then he suddenly quit his PhD program because he couldn't handle the environment. After that, he started following Jake around and wearing his clothes, so he kind of sounds like a little bit of a stalker figure to me. Jake then mentions that both his mom and his brother have the same habit of pulling out their hair compulsively, and after that we get another insert. We've talked with almost everyone he'd worked with and have been able to put a picture together. He'd been developing physical problems, issues, everyone noticed. He had a rash in his arm and his neck. His forehead would get sweaty. Someone saw him a few weeks ago at his desk in a sort of daze, just looking at the wall. That all sounds alarming. I know it does now, but in the context of them, it seemed private, like his own health issue. No one wanted to meddle. There were a few incidents. Over the last year or so, he was playing his music quite loud during his breaks. And when people would ask him to turn it down, he'd just ignore it and then start the song all over again. No one thought of making a formal complaint. For playing music, it didn't seem like a big deal. I guess not. 2 people we've interviewed mentioned that he had notebooks. He wrote a lot, but no one ever asked about what he was writing. No, I suppose not. We found those notebooks. What was in them? His writing. He had very neat, precise penmanship. But what about the content? The content of what? The notebook. Isn't that what matters? What he was writing about? The content? What might it mean? Right, well, we haven't read them yet. It's now getting very late and the snow is getting worse, but Jake then decides that he wants to stop in at a local Dairy Queen. Go figure, Jake. Jessica goes along with this, and then the entire trip just kind of feels like this weird fever dream. There were 3 girls working at the Dairy Queen. One of them is the one up in the front taking their order, and the other 2 are just kind of like sitting back and laughing at her. The one girl that is taking their order has like rashes over her arm, and she mentions that there's a weird smell in the Dairy Queen because they're varnishing something in the back. And then Jessica remarks that it's kind of weird that a Dairy Queen would be varnishing something in the first place. The whole situation is just really odd. Jake and Jessica then order 2 lemonades from the Dairy Queen, which is kind of a weird order to have at a Dairy Queen, but go figure. And then the girl who is working the front counter, again, the girl with the rashes, the high school girl, she looks at Jessica and then looks at Jake, and then she whispers to Jessica, "You don't have to go," and tells her that she is very scared for her. Pretty eerie. The 2 start driving back home again, and they're kind of just joking around with each other and having a good time. Jessica starts to think that maybe she shouldn't end things with Jake, and then they end up drinking up most of their lemonades, and the cups are all kind of like sticky and gross in the cup holders. So Jake decides that he needs to throw the cups away, and in doing this, he says they can stop at a local high school near them. He says he's never went to the high school, like he didn't attend it growing up, but he knows where it's at. They arrive at the high school, and Jake goes to the dumpsters to throw the cups away. He ends up just kind of standing next to the dumpsters and then returning to the car without having gotten rid of the cups. Jessica then sees the headlights of another car through like the falling snow in the parking lot. And then she remembers a time when she was in high school and she needed to get into the school at night. And the door was open and she walked in and she found the janitor in there just cleaning up the school. And she says that the janitor in the school when she was growing up looked unremarkable and was just kind of like somebody she would have never noticed. When Jessica questions Jake about him not throwing the cups away, he says that the trash cans he were looking at wasn't actually trash. It was just like road salt. I don't know if you know that, but in a lot of places that snow a lot, they have these big trash cans full of road salt to melt the snow. So he says that they were filled with road salt and that he saw a black pickup truck behind the school and that somebody must be inside of the school, a worker or something. Jessica says that this isn't necessarily true. There could just be like an old beater parked back there. And Jake gets like really upset about this for no reason. He says the only reason that somebody would be at the school is if they really had to be. That if they could be anywhere else, that's where they would be. He's really upset about this. He says that the janitor probably just has a terrible job. He has to clean up for messy kids all day. And kids do stupid things. And they put trash all over the place. And he just does this work completely thanklessly while nobody even notices him. Directly after him kind of freaking out, he leans in and tries to get frisky with Jessica. They kind of start making out and like she takes her shirt off. And then while they're making out, he calls her Steph. This isn't really explained a whole ton, but she's kind of like caught off guard by this, but she doesn't really have time to react because immediately after this, Jake starts to lose his mind again, freaking out because he says that he saw somebody inside the school watching them. He says, like, there's this pervert in there watching us, and he says he needs to go talk to him, and he gets out of the car and runs into the school, leaving Jessica alone. Jessica waits in the car alone and eventually hears several loud banging noises before deciding to head into the school after Jake. She looks through a window and sees a janitor with a mop. So she's inside the school right now, looking into like a hallway. She sees a janitor with a mop, and he seems to be like dancing around with it. She doesn't know why, but she feels like really uncomfortable looking at this guy. She says he's wearing yellow rubber gloves, like cleaning gloves, and a gas mask. And then he turns to look at her direction, and this really freaks her out. She like ducks down for a couple minutes, and then after she thinks the coast is clear, she like looks up through the window again. And she sees the janitor like crawling on the ground and like this weird kind of like almost like he's in a trance, just this weird little quiet crawling. He heads down another hallway, so like he's moving away from her. And then she goes down a different hallway and she finds the janitor's closet. She says that the closet feels really familiar to her somehow, like she knows everything inside of it before she's been there. And then she finds photos of this janitor. She says he's an older man with gray hair and that he looks pretty unremarkable. She also finds pictures of what he thinks is the janitor's parents. And then she finds a small child's shirt just sitting in the janitor's closet. And she remarks that this shirt was definitely hers when she was a kid. So again, really weird. The other thing she finds in the janitor's room is a video camera that is hooked up to a TV that has a tape on it. So she hits play and she finds a video of somebody walking through the school just like really silently and then looking out of the window at the black truck that they saw parked behind the school earlier. And inside there's a man in there. And she says that the man inside the truck looks just like Jake, but that can't be right because Jake said he'd never been there before. She then gets really uncomfortable and decides that she needs to leave the school, which is good. Go figure. Jessica, you definitely should be doing that. And so she decides to leave the same way she came in, and she gets to the door that she entered the school through, and she sees that it's been chained shut. You remember in the insert earlier, they talked about how the door had been chained shut. But on the chain, there was a handwritten note, and the only thing that the note says is, there are more than 1 million violent crimes in America every year, but what happens in this school? Jessica hears the sound of footsteps from a pair of rubber boots coming towards her. She starts to panic like anybody would, and she hides in a classroom. Then the school's PA system, like their loudspeaker system, starts to play a country song that she recognizes. And then inside the classroom, she finds freshly painted graffiti on the floors that says, "I know what you are going to do, just you and me now. There is only one question." And that, of course, is a line that has been taken from the voicemail that she's been receiving from her stalker. Jessica then starts to grow more and more panicked, which is, of course, completely understandable in this situation, but she starts kind of going overboard, like she's losing her mind. She says that she feels like she's in a nightmare, and that she wishes this was some sort of supernatural situation, but she knows that it isn't, that it's all real. The school feels very familiar to her now, and she knows that she won't escape, and then her hair starts falling out in clumps. And after that, we get another insert. He'd been working for the school for more than 30 years. No previous incidents. Nothing in his file. Nothing? That's unusual too. More than 30 years at one job, at one school. Lived out in an old place. I think it was originally his parents' farmhouse. They both died a long time ago. So I'm told. Everyone I talked to says he was quite gentle. He didn't seem to know how to talk to people, couldn't relate to them, or didn't try. I don't think he was interested in socializing. He took a lot of his breaks out in his truck. He'd just go sit in his pickup at the back of the school. That was his break. And what was it about his hearing? He had cochlear implants. His hearing became pretty bad. He had allergies to certain foods, milk and dairy. He had a delicate constitution. He didn't like to go down into the school's boiler room in the basement. He'd always ask someone else to go if there was work to be done down there. Strange. And all those notebooks and diaries and books, always his nose in a book. I remember seeing him in one of the science labs after school ended, and he was just standing there, looking at nothing. I watched him for a bit, and then went into the classroom. He didn't notice me. He wasn't cleaning as he should have been. He had no reason to be in there, so I very gently asked him what he was doing. There was a moment before he replied, and then he turned, calmly put a finger to his mouth, and shooed me. I couldn't believe it. Very strange. And before I could say anything else, he said, "I don't even want to hear the clock." Then he just walked by me and left. I'd forgotten about it until all this happened. If he was so smart, you wonder, why was he pushing a mop for so long? Why didn't he do something else? You have to interact with coworkers in most jobs. You can't just sit in your truck. Still, a school custodian? That's what I don't understand. If he wanted to be alone, why did he work at a job where he was surrounded by people? Wouldn't that be a kind of self-torture? Yeah, come to think of it, I guess it probably would. We go back to Jessica into the school, and her mind starts to completely deteriorate at this point. She starts to feel lost and disoriented and starts using the pronoun we to refer to herself instead of just me or they or anybody else. She remembers the picture that Jake's mom gave her, and she pulls it out of her pocket and looks at it. She says that it is a picture of her, of Jake, that she and Jake are the same person. It is now that they return to the custodian's closet, and Jessica now recognizes the picture of the man on the wall, this custodian, this janitor, as herself. The janitor then comes back to the room with his gas mask and his rubber gloves on, but Jessica isn't afraid anymore. She apologizes to the man, and then he hangs her a wire hanger and says, "I'm thinking of ending things." She undoes the wire hanger and then stabs herself repeatedly, killing herself. She remarks that she answered the question, and then we get our last insert and our last page of the novel. There's one other thing I wanted to ask about. The note. What? The note near his body. I was told there was a note. You heard about that? Yes. Well, it wasn't so much of a note as, well, it was detailed. Detailed? Some kind of diary, maybe, or story. Story? I mean, he wrote about characters, or maybe there were people he knew, but then he's in the story too, except he's not the one telling it. Well, maybe he is, in a way. I don't know, I'm not sure I follow it. I can't tell what's true and what's not, and yet, does it explain why? Does it explain why he ended things? I'm not sure. We're not really sure. Maybe. What do you mean? He either explained it or he didn't. It's just, what? It's not that simple. I don't know. Here, look at this. What is all of this? This is a lot of pages. Is this what he wrote? Yes, you should read it, but maybe start at the end, then circle back. First, though, I think you better sit down. And that was I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Iain Reid. So now let's get into what the book is really about. Jake, Jessica, and the school janitor are all the same person. The entire book plays out as an elaborate and extended fantasy of a man who is considering ending his own life. Jake is the janitor of a high school who feels like he has nothing in his life. We can assume that his parents were talking about him when they mentioned somebody who could have become a PhD scientist but ended up quitting for a more stable profession, that being a high school janitor. We don't know if Jessica was ever real, but it seems to me that Jake really did meet a girl at a bar years ago, but just never got her number, and now he's playing out what could have happened if he had been more outgoing in that moment. None of what happened with his parents in the house was real, and it's more likely, and then confirmed later, that his parents died years ago and he was living in their house. The calls and voicemails that Jessica receives throughout the book are Jake's intrusive thoughts. They are the thoughts that he can't get rid of, telling him to end his own life. That's why they come from her own phone number, and why the caller says that he knows everything about her. He knows exactly what she's like. It's because they're the same person. Jake's brother also most likely did not exist. When he is describing his brother as somebody who couldn't handle life and then started stalking him, he's really reflecting at a point that he hit in his own life where he just kind of gave up. He couldn't handle his PhD studies, and he's using this persona of his brothers to be critical of his own actions. Jessica recognizes herself in the photos of Jake because they are the same person. And then the paintings that his parents have inside the basement are kind of a tricky part of the story that I've never really been able to put down exactly what they mean. But in my mind, they're a representation of like the dark urges and these dark thoughts inside of himself that just want to be set free. And that's why we see all the scratching at the door. It's like a place he doesn't want to enter, he doesn't want to think about, but it's always down there constantly. That's why in the end of the book, it talks about how this janitor, Jake, was afraid to enter the boiler room. It seems like there was some weird baggage about that room specifically and the dark thoughts in there. The only events in the novel that are presented in an objective manner are the inserts that we've been reading. The writings that are mentioned at the end when they're talking about the inserts, the note that he left, very well could just be the entire book that we've read at this point, again, besides the inserts, just all from Jake's perspective. And then they told us to start at the end and circle back to make sense of things. And in that way, I think the author is inviting us to read the book again or watch this video again, if that's how you want to do it too, but to reread it from that new perspective, which to me, it was like a really gratifying and interesting experience. Our actual timeline of events in Jake's life are very few and far between. We know that he grew up at his family farm and was most likely an only child. He went to college and was on track to become a PhD professor before suddenly quitting and then moving back home. Then he takes a job as a school janitor and works there for years. At some point during this period, his parents die, and he starts to think about ending his own life, and then he starts graffitiing the school and kills himself in the janitor's closet using the wire hanger, and his body is found later. I'm thinking of ending things as a profoundly sad story. It's the tale of a man who couldn't cope with his own loneliness, a man so far gone that he had to make up elaborate fantasies about an imagined girlfriend that he never had, and even in those fantasies, she is still thinking about breaking up with him. We are left with this portrait of a truly lonely man who needed help but didn't know where to look for it, and I absolutely love this story. I absolutely love this book. I think it's nearly perfect. Please go read the novel if you haven't already, or at least go back and watch this video again so you can kind of pick up on all the hints that I kind of spread throughout it. I try not to make it too obvious, and the book really does merit a read, even if you know the ending, because there's so much just like character work that is done from the perspective of Jessica, the main character, who is really Jake and the janitor. So I would really recommend reading that. The movie is pretty good too, but it's kind of even more confusing and changes some key elements to the plot that I wasn't really a big fan of. Still, it's a really great movie, and I love Charlie Kaufman's work, so I would give that a watch too if you're interested. And that is going to do it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe if you like this kind of content, and there's going to be more of it coming up soon. I've loved the support I've seen on the channel. You guys have been super awesome. And I'll see you guys pretty soon. See ya.